So you took the engineering principles and then essentially for each role defined what those looked like for each role, in addition to then like expectations and things like that. Was that like the first place that you all started?
Correct. Yeah. So for each, let's pick a role. Let's say a M3 role or a P5 role. Right. For that role, we said these are the things that we expect from that person, right? From that role, right? And then we wrote that as a table for every level. And there is another table that says what does it mean by going from this role to that role, right? Just as an explanation of this is what it takes to go from a P3 to a P4 or a P4 to a P5. And if you look at the table, the P5 I mentioned, it's not like it's like super descriptive. It talks about these are the kinds of things that you should know. And we didn't want it to be if you don't do this, you can't get to the next level. To get to the next level, they have to be doing most of the things at the next level. And there's also a need, especially in the management areas, to say there needs to be an opening at that level, right? You can't just promote somebody to a director if there's no director scope for the role, right? Even though they may be operating. So it's important to have other systems in place where people need to be able to move across. So the internal mobility program becomes extremely important. So all these other programs hinge off of this main Pascal framework that we have. And for each of those, we had to build out certain things. For internal mobility program, we had to have a process that was hanging off of Pascal. For AMP program that I mentioned, for manager training, there were lots of people who wanted ICs to want it to be managers. But just looking at the block and saying, "Oh yeah, I want to be a manager. I think I can do all this." Maybe they'll love as a they would be a great manager and they'll like it, because a manager role is very different from an IC role, just in terms of satisfaction and what happens every single day. It's a completely different life. So this apprentice manager program was like a program where ICs can try out to be a manager without feeling like a failure if they went back as an IC. So we have a number of people who have tried a management role and said, this is not for me. I don't get the job satisfaction. I want to go back to an IC role. And this facilitates those. So we built out all these different things around Pascal after we built out the core framework.
I had one other question about the working groups. So I think just to get a quick sense of who was in those groups and how'd you assemble those? Because I think it sounded like they played a huge role in defining the expectations for each of those roles.
Absolutely. So we had a mix of people in the role. So we had HRBPs in there. We had, if we were, let's say, defining a P5 role, we had P5 engineers and P6 engineers and some P4 engineers, right, who have been in the company or have seen other companies. So we definitely went with a mix that had a diversity of views and thought. And we also wanted to make sure it's does cover different regions, different gender, different views of things. So it's very important. And this is not just for this. And any team that you create, the diversity aspect is very, very important, right? So it eliminates groupthink, but it also, the overall, the result that you get at the end of it is much, much better. So whenever you create a team, it's just not because, oh, we have these 5 people who are free, they can do it next week, let's just do this project. You need to be intentional in figuring out what's the best composition that we can have and make sure that you get to that composition. Otherwise, you do get suboptimal results.